You started your IFR cross-country planning with an early preview of the weather and laid out a preliminary route. Then you got your pre-flight weather briefing. So now it's time to complete your IFR flight plan. And in the process, you'll answer several questions. Do you need to list an alternate in your flight plan? Is the weather good enough at your proposed alternate? How long is this trip going to take, and how much fuel do you need? When you're done answering those questions, you'll be ready to file your IFR flight plan. After getting your pre-flight weather briefing, make your final choice of your route. Although the DPs and stars may tie down the ends, if there is no preferred route, the middle is all yours. Take any en route weather hazards into account and pick the safest geography. Then total up the leg distances and make a rough estimate of the time en route to confirm that the route you've selected is within the realm of possibility. You may need to file an alternate in your flight plan. If your destination airport does not have an instrument approach, you will always need to file an alternate. And yes, you can file IFR to an airport without an instrument approach. If your destination airport does have an instrument approach, apply the 1, 2, 3 rule to find out if you need an alternate. If for 1 hour before until 1 hour after your estimated time of arrival at your destination, the ceiling is forecast to be at least 2,000 feet and the visibility at least 3 miles, no alternate is required. If your destination doesn't meet the 1, 2, 3 rule, it's time to trot out that list of downwind, downhill, better weather alternate candidates. Now, it just makes sense that if you have to go to an alternate airport because of bad weather at your destination, you would want the weather at that alternate airport to be pretty good. Alternate airport weather minimums are based on your exact estimated time of arrival at that airport, no 1 hour before or after here. If you plan on shooting an ILS approach at your proposed alternate, the standard minimums to list that airport as an alternate in your IFR flight plan are a forecast ceiling of 600 feet and visibility of 2 miles. If you plan on shooting a non-precision approach, such as a localizer, VOR, or NDB approach, then the standard minimums are a ceiling of 800 feet and visibility of 2 miles. However, some approaches have higher than standard alternate weather minimums, or there may be conditions attached to planning on that airport or approach as an alternate. For example, take a look at the VOR runway 26 approach to Ogallala, Nebraska. We're looking at the lower left corner of the plate. Remember those little black triangles we talked about earlier? If the approach plate has a black triangle with an A in it, like you see here, that means there is something non-standard about planning on using this approach or airport for an alternate. For the details, check in the front of the NOS book. At Ogallala, it says that for the VOR or GPS runway 8 or VOR runway 26 approaches, the alternate minimums for category A and B aircraft are 900 and 2. Now, notice the information for Olathe, Kansas, the New Century Air Center Airport. There's a note that says NA when control tower closed. NA stands for not authorized, and that note means you cannot file this airport as your alternate if you would arrive there after the tower is closed. Why not? Well, if you look at the note at the beginning of the alternate minimums table, you'll see that alternate minimums are not authorized if the navigation facility is going to be unmonitored or if there is no weather reporting. At New Century Air Center, when the tower closes, maybe no one monitors the approach facilities to make sure they're working right. And if you're going to use that airport as your escape hatch, the FAA wants you to know if the nav facility for the approach is working before you commit yourself to going there. But sometimes that NA shows up on only one approach at an airport, like here on the NDB DME runway 30 left approach at San Jose, California. That means you cannot plan on using that particular approach at your alternate. So in this case, if the NDB approach was the only one you were equipped to shoot, you could not file San Jose as your alternate. And that's probably because no one monitors that NDB to make sure it's working okay. But if you really like that airport as an alternate, don't throw in the towel just yet. Check the other approaches for the airport. Sometimes only certain approaches are not authorized and others are still valid. At San Jose, if you could shoot the VOR approach, for example, you could still plan on it as your alternate. Now, the reason you can't use an airport without weather reporting as an alternate is that the FAA wants you to be able to know what the weather actually is before you commit yourself to going there. So if you look at the approach plates for an airport like Freeman Field in Louisa, Virginia, and find that all of them have a black A triangle and the letters NA alongside, it probably means that the airport doesn't have weather reporting. JEP makes it easy for you by showing all the alternate minimums, standard, non-standard, or not authorized, with the airport information. That way you don't have to remember them or go somewhere else to look them up. Now, can you use an airport that doesn't have any instrument approaches as an alternate? Sure, just as long as the forecast says you can descend from the airway MEA to the airport in VFR conditions. And by the way, if you have an IFR certified GPS, the FAA wants you to have an option in case RAIM isn't available. So, as we mentioned before, your alternate airport must have at least one other kind of approach that you can make besides GPS. Now, these minimums are what you might call filing minimums. Once you're airborne, if you need to divert to the alternate, it becomes just another destination. And that means the minimums printed on the approach plate are the ones that now apply. Okay, you've chosen your route to your destination and picked an alternate. So it's time to put pencil to a flight log form. In some ways, filling out the flight log for an IFR flight is easier than for a VFR flight because IFR charts already have the courses and distances printed on them. All you need to do is calculate your heading and ground speed based on the wind. Using the ground speed, you can then compute the required time, and from the time, you can compute the fuel required. Since the courses are all given in magnetic direction, it's handiest to convert the wind direction to magnetic before you start. That way, the whole problem is worked with magnetic directions. The headings come out in magnetic direction, and you only have to make the true to magnetic conversion once. And that's a real time saver. Use your POH data for the time to climb and fuel consumption. And at the other end, add time from the IAF to the runway at approach speed. But calculate fuel consumption here conservatively at the cruise rate. Do the same for the trip from your destination to your alternate. Don't forget that you have to climb back up to altitude from the missed approach point. As you might guess, a required alternate can sometimes impose a pretty substantial range penalty. Now you have a flight log with the total time and required fuel to your destination, and to an alternate if it's required. Obviously, though, you'll need some reserve fuel, and you'll need somewhat more than for a VFR flight. The regulations say that for an IFR flight, you need to carry enough fuel to reach your destination, then fly to your alternate, and then fly 45 minutes more at normal cruising speed. Remember earlier we mentioned checking in your weather briefing for known ATC delays? Well, you need to include fuel for any known delays, too. Okay, that's the required fuel. Do you have room in your tanks beyond the required amount? Assuming weight limitations permit, take all the fuel you can carry. There's an old aviation adage that you can never have too much fuel unless you're on fire. That holds doubly true for even the most carefully planned instrument flight. The extra grandma gas will let you hold if ATC's freeway gets an unexpected backup. If you calculate beforehand how long the extra fuel will let you fly at holding speed, you'll know how long you can sit in a holding pattern before you have to go somewhere else. So you won't have to invoke the magic words minimum fuel. Now it's time to take all your hard work and put it on display for ATC by filing your IFR flight plan. Some of the numbered blocks might be filled out differently than you would for a VFR flight. Block 3, aircraft type and special equipment. The controller really needs to know how you're equipped, GPS, DME, etc., so he knows what kind of clearances he can give you. If you're flying a new Skyhawk with IFR certified GPS, file as /Golf. If you're flying one of the older birds in the fleet that doesn't have GPS, be sure you get the right code. You can look up the code for your equipment in the AIM. Let's look at Block 7, cruising altitude. Just enter your first requested altitude. You may be planning to fly different altitudes for different legs of the flight, but ATC just wants to know the first one. Block 8, route of flight. If you'll be flying a departure procedure, start with the DP and transition code as shown on the printed plate. Then put in the Victor Airways you'll be using. As long as you stay on the same Victor Airway, you don't have to show any intermediate points. Just enter the fixes where you change airways. And if you're planning on using a star, put that name and transition code at the end. If you're flying direct using GPS, just put in the waypoints you want to use. Now let's look at Block 12, fuel on board. Remember, this is the time to dry tanks, not the required fuel that you so carefully computed. And Block 13 is alternate airport. You must file an alternate unless the weather at your destination meets the 1-2-3 rule. While we're speaking of flight plans, here's an occasionally used variation, the composite flight plan. Sometimes you may find it advantageous to fly part of the flight IFR and the rest of it VFR. This composite flight plan can be filed on a single flight plan form. You just check both VFR and IFR in Block 1. And in the remarks block, indicate your changeover point and whether you're starting out VFR or IFR. Regardless of whether IFR or VFR is flown first, you contact flight service at the changeover point. If the VFR portion is first, open the flight plan as usual with flight service. 5 minutes before you reach the changeover point, call flight service again for your IFR clearance and close your VFR flight plan. If the IFR part is first, follow normal IFR departure procedures. When you arrive at the changeover point in VFR weather, cancel IFR with ATC and then call flight service to open your VFR flight plan. And now you're ready for the payoff to all your preparation. You're ready to fly IFR cross country.